Welcome to another episode of On the History Trail. I'm your host and tour guide, Mark Nonestied. On today's episode, we're going to explore a new exhibit at the East Brunswick Museum titled What's Cooking? A History of Kitchen Utensils and Accessories from the Colonial Time to the Modern, some of which are quite complex and crazy looking, and explore these items and figure out what they are. We're also going to visit with food historian Susen Luczy, who lives in the Historic District in one of the old homes here. She's going to demonstrate colonial cooking in a large open hearth fireplace. So sit back and relax and follow me as we travel on the History Trail. Well, our exhibit starts off in the 1750s, when most people living in this region would have cooked in large open hearth fireplaces. Inside the fireplaces, they often had these wrought iron cranes, which they could use to suspend pots and pans over the fireplace. One of the ways we know about what material were in people's homes are through will inventories. Will inventories are historic documents that were taken at the time of death, and they often record a list of personal items in the house. And what we find are lots of kitchen items made out of iron that show up in these will inventories. Iron pots and pans. Here we have a 18th century waffle iron, which opens up. And you can see the decorative design there, where you would place the batter and then close it and place it over the fire, heating it on one side till it was done and then flipping it over and heating it on the other side. One of the items that's somewhat rare in homes from this time period are ceramic objects, with the exception of what was known as redware. And this is a redware storage jar from about the early 1800s. It has a brownish glaze on it, but if we can see areas where the glaze is chipped, it exposes the red-bodied clay from where the vessel gets its name from. Other items in the case include this spider skillet, and it stands on 3 legs so that you can place hot coals underneath the pan for cooking. And if you look at the lid has this deep inset to it. And that's also for placing hot coals on the top of this also. So you can get even heat from the top and the bottom as well. Coming out of the 1700s, if we move into the early 1800s, we find also that they're using similar materials that would have been prevalent 50, 60 years earlier in the mid-1700s. By the early 1800s, they're still cooking with large fireplaces, but as the decades progress, we find iron cook stoves showing up in will inventories. In addition to items being made out of iron, we also see the introduction of other types of ceramic. And one of the common ceramic items from that time period is stoneware. And it's interesting because stoneware was manufactured here in central New Jersey, and there were 2 stoneware potters that were located in the Historic District. And here at the museum, we actually have a number of pieces that were produced by these stoneware potters. It's a gray bodied clay. It often has this sort of rough surface from the salt glazing, and these are common storage jugs that were popular in the early 1800s. So this is a food storage. We've seen food preparation material here with the iron cooking pans. And now we're going to take a look at tableware. And one of the common tableware items that shows up in this region by the 1830s and 40s is imported English ironstone pieces. This is a dish that was made in England. If we turn it around, we can see the company mark on the back. In fact, this diamond pattern on here, this is a code for patent that patents the design on the front of it. And each one of these letters stands for the month, the day in the year that the design was patented. And this dish dates to about the 1840s. And fragments of these dishes have been found, dug up out of the ground here in the historic district. So we know that these kinds of items were imported into the area in the 1840s and would have graced the tables of homes in this area. Prior to the Second World War, East Brunswick was a rural farming community. Crops that were grown in the area were shipped to some of the larger markets. Farmers also invested in dairy and poultry production, and there were a large number of dairy cows and chickens that could be found on farms throughout East Brunswick. These are some artifacts that are associated with the production of dairy and of chickens and poultry. On the bottom here, we have a wooden butter churn that dates from about 1880. And it's a hand-cranked churn. So the heavy cream would be placed into the top of the churn, and then the handle was turned around, and the heavy cream was whipped up into the butter. They would take a large paddle and scoop out the butter. They could then place it into decorative wooden butter molds. Now, cows also provided milk, and there were a couple dairies here in East Brunswick in the early 1900s, and the museum has a collection of different kinds of dairy bottles or milk bottles. Poultry chickens were also common in East Brunswick in the early 1900s. Farmers would bring the eggs to stores or to markets and sell them. This here is an egg weighing scale, or it would grade the different types of eggs. The egg would be placed here, and the weight of the egg would determine whether it was a small, medium, large, or extra large egg, and then they could be separated and sold into the various grades. Food could be molded into all kinds of shapes and sizes, and in the 1800s and early 1900s there was a wide variety of material that was produced for molding different kinds of food. We have some of those molds here displayed in this cabinet. There are cast iron molds for corn cakes, or such as this one from about 1900. Jelly molds were also common. They came in a variety of different materials, such as tin molds for jelly. And this is an example from about the 1890s of a ceramic mold for jelly. And you can see it's quite deep. They would have had to put quite a bit of pectin into the jelly in order to get it to stand very firm. And these types of molds were produced here in America and in England as well. Other examples were specific for various holidays, such as Easter, when chocolate or cakes were produced in these lamb molds. And finally, we also have another example of a waffle iron. We saw the 18th century version earlier, and we have another stovetop example here from about 1900. This case looks at both tea and coffee. And tea was a popular drink in the American colonies prior to the Revolutionary War. And it was a sign of culture in a wealthy house to have an imported tea set from England. But of course, the American Revolution changed all that when colonists started dumping the tea in Boston Harbor. And people changed from tea to coffee. After the Revolutionary War, both drinks gained favor in American society. And we have a number of tea and coffee items here dating from the 1800s into the mid-1900s. And what's also interesting to note is the different types of material that were utilized over a span of several decades. The earliest material was cast iron, and we saw that earlier. And here we have a cast iron teapot from about 1890. If we look at the bottom of it, It has a piece here that's meant to go into the top of a wood-burning stove. On the tops of the stove, they would have these round holes that would cover up over the fire. So you could lift up the stove plate and then place this right into it, and this would go down into the firebox, and it would heat up the water much faster. We can see almost an identical version of this teapot in cast aluminum from the 1920s. And then right next to it is another version of a teapot made out of copper, a little bit earlier from the early 1900s. Other types of material that were utilized was white enamel. This is a white enameled coffee pot. There's an under material of iron that's then dipped in this white enameled. And these were very popular in the late 1800s into the 1920s and 30s. They were much lighter than cast iron, but one of the problems is they tended to chip, and if you look at it carefully, you can see this one has some chip marks on it. This was a problem that's associated with enameled pots and pans. Some of the other accoutrements that are associated with coffee and tea are storage containers. And here we have a tin storage container from about 1850, which we can still see the word coffee painted across the front of it. Sugar pots also, another item that's associated with coffee and tea, and this is an English ceramic sugar pot from about 1839. There was an endless variety of kitchen gadgets that were invented in the 1800s and early 1900s, and we have a very small selection of some of those different types of gadgets here on the table. We'll start off with this item here at the end. This is believe it or not, this is a toaster. It's from about 1920. This would have been placed on top of a wood-burning stove, and the slices of bread placed here, and then the heat from the stove coming up through the perforated bottom would toast the bread, and then when it was finished on one side, they would flip it over and toast the bread on the other. This item down here at the end dates from the late 1800s. It was meant to be clipped onto a table, so it would stand in this direction. This is a cherry stoner or cherry pitter. You would place the cherries in the top, turn the handle, and the device would cut the cherry in half. The two ends of the cherry would come out the front, and the pit would come out the bottom of the piece. We'll take a look at this item here. This is was developed in the 19th century. It is an apple peeler. You could purchase a similar apple peeler like this through the Sears and Roebuck mail order catalogs. In fact, in 1902, this one cost 63 cents to buy. You would place the apple onto the three prongs here, turn the handle, and a knife goes around which would take the skin off the apple. And then when it was finished, if you look carefully right here, there's a foot that comes out and kicks the apple off of the prongs. And finally, our other item here is another style of apple peeler with all these gears on it. It also was developed in the 1800s. Sears and Roebuck sold a similar example to this in their 1902 catalog for 98 cents. And we'll demonstrate how this one works. You place the apple onto the prongs. It would clip onto the side of a table. You can see the turn screw here to clip it onto the side of a table. And then you turn the handle, and this knife rotates around and takes the skin off. And this is just one of the many interesting gadgets that were developed in the 19th century. We're going to get a chance to see some more of these cooking items in action. We're going to go visit with Susen Luczy, a resident here of the Historic District and a food historian as well.
Well,
Susan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You live in one of the few 18th century homes here in the historic district. Do you know the history of this structure?
Well, I have researched it back to when they first started recording the deeds in Middlesex County, which is about 1805.
Okay.
And at that point, it was owned by the Bassett family. And it appears through other research at the New Jersey Room up in the New Brunswick Library that it was owned by John Bassett, who had it deeded to him by one of the original 12 proprietors of New Jersey. So given what I have researched and what other people have told me with the structure of the fireplace, we estimated it goes to between 1720 and 1705, somewhere in that neighborhood is when the original part of the house was built, which was probably this main room.
Okay. Okay, and of course the Bassett family, they're one of the earliest settlers to this area, and the house is located right along the South River, and that family was instrumental in shipping a lot of goods out of this area, so it would seem likely that they would have settled right along the river. So this is one of I guess the few surviving Bassett homes from that early time period.
Yes, and we're pretty sure that it was occupied at one point by Asher, which was the son of John. There was a pottery about 3 houses over. There was a big kiln. And every time we're out digging in the yard, we dig up a lot of pottery
really?
shards. So,
That's great.
In fact, I have a piece over here that is was dug up recently
Really?
in the yard.
Interesting. Interesting.
We're figuring the original pottery.
And it looks like the house retains quite a bit of the original features. I mean, the prominent feature here, obviously, is this massive cooking fireplace. And you feel that this is original to the house?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you do a lot of demonstrations with historic cooking and historic implements as well. And so what are we making here today?
And I have quite a collection. What we're making here in the fireplace, in the one pot I have some fried apples going.
Okay.
And in the Dutch oven, which is the one over here with the lip and the coals on the top of it, I have another gingerbread. I have one here that I baked a little bit earlier today on the table, so that's what it's going to look like. It was baked in a mold in the Dutch oven, and when it is done and we take it out, we're going to have some fresh gingerbread. And I have ingredients to mix up some corn cakes to do on the griddle for you, which would have been similar to a hoe cake, H-O-E cake, that probably came from the South. But they did use a lot of cornmeal in colonial times because wheat was just not available to them.
Well, I see a lot of traditional ingredients here. I mean, you have eggs.
Eggs, butter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
cornmeal, of course, molasses.
Okay. And even some of the cooking implements look like historic pieces or reproductions of historic pieces.
Yeah, reproductions. Several of these pieces I've picked up at Cooperstown and Sturbridge. Some of them are marked Sturbridge.
Okay.
This would have been a milk bucket that they would have stored in the spring house with their milk in it.
Okay, so great. Some stoneware pieces, some of the red earthenware, which was very typical of the 1700s. And so you have a great collection here of what look like original cooking implements as well.
Yes, we have been collecting for probably almost 20 years now. We started collecting on our travels south, and as we've found different places that specialize in the more primitive things, we have collected quite a few pieces. The griddle is an authentic piece. It came out of one of the big halls down in South Jersey.
Okay.
It was authenticated from the primitive dealer that I bought it from. The gridiron that's hanging is also an authentic type piece.
Okay.
Yes, there are a lot of reproductions that are very similar, but this one is an original piece.
So let's talk about the parts of the fireplace here. I mean, you have this massive crane that's inside here, and that's an original piece.
An original piece, as far as we know. Yes.
Okay, and so that's an item where they're suspending pots and pans.
Yes.
Off of them. And so what are some of the other accoutrements that are hanging?
Well, the different pieces on the side over here would be trammels.
Okay.
And actually, this big one would have hung not so big, I'm not sure I can get it off. Not from the crane, but there was, in the older fireplaces, they didn't have the metal cranes. They had what was called a lug pole, and it was actually suspended across the back of the fireplace. above where we would normally put a crane, and you can see by the size of it that it would and accommodate a fairly large log, which is usually what they used, was a green log, and these would hang from that, and then this would be really your being able to control the heat.
So
by putting the pot up and down on the trammel.
Okay, so you could lower the pot closer to the fire or
high,
raise
medium,
it up.
and low.
Okay.
That's the 17th
and what a
century.
piece! I mean, this looks like it's all hand wrought,
Yes.
iron, handmade piece.
Yeah,
obviously.
I think this one actually came out of one of the big Pennsylvania fieldstone houses. We picked this up on one of our travels over into Pennsylvania. We do have some smaller ones, and these actually, we have two of these that were made by a blacksmith over near Lambertville. We had gone in and asked him, did he have anything like a trammel? And he said, draw me a picture and I'll make whatever you want. So a couple weeks later, we went back and picked these up, and it gives you the opportunity to be able to raise and lower it.
Great. So I see, so we have the crane, which gives us the ability to suspend things over the fire, and so it actually swings into the room.
Yes. Yes, it does. And as I said earlier, this is actually considered a left-handed fireplace. You would reach in with your right hand, you would stir the pot with your left.
Okay. So you can actually prepare the food out here and then swing it right over the fireplace.
Yeah, and this was a big improvement over the earlier fireplaces, for instance, back in England and in Europe, where they were so huge, they were walk-in fireplaces, and they were much more dangerous for the women to use because you actually had to step into the fireplace to be able to get to the pots that were hanging at the back. Where this one, you could pull the crane out, pull the whatever you were cooking out, and be able to actually stir. This is actually a rotating
Oh, look at that,
griddle, and this is a hook that goes over the bar that actually rotates. So I'm sure over time things got improved, and women complained enough that the men decided they were going to make it a little bit easier for them.
Now another feature, this once had a brick oven, a
beehive oven, yes.
Beehive oven, and so you actually have the arch opening from that. But at some point they removed that.
It was removed, we believe, when they added the kitchen onto the back of the house.
Okay.
The oven where you see the back where the bricks are now would have gone back probably another 5 feet and was probably 4 to 6 feet wide.
Okay.
Built up on a big base to support it underneath, with a door at the front. They would physically, probably once a week, what they would call fire the oven. They would actually build a fire in the oven to heat up the bricks, and that could take anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, depending on how big the oven was. Then when they were ready to bake, that gave them the time to mix up all their bread and their whatever they were making to put in there, get their chickens ready to roast. They would actually scrape out all of the coals and mop down quickly the floor of the oven, and then put whatever they were baking actually into the oven to bake on the floor of the oven.
So it's just the heat from the bricks
Was the radiant
radiating
heat,
is
yes.
what's cooking their
Exactly.
breads or whatnot. So I also noticed, okay, so you have the oven, you have the crane here where you have pots and pans that are suspended, but you also have pieces on the hearth, the floor
Yes.
of the, and you're using the hot ashes here to cook things as well. Can we talk
Yes.
about some of these other
Sure,
items?
and anyone who is familiar with actually Boy Scout camping or Girl Scout camping, because I know Girl Scouts do it too, this is actually a Dutch oven. And it's up on 3 small legs, so you put your coals down, you take some coals from the fire, you put them down, you put this over it, cover it, and the lid has a lip so that you can actually put coals on the top to cook from the top and the bottom. So when they didn't want to fire the big oven, they would use this oven. We're just going to check and see if that's done. Not quite. I'm going to put that back on there for a few minutes.
And what are you cooking in there?
That's a gingerbread.
Gingerbread.
That's a gingerbread, yeah.
And so these ovens must have come in various sizes. Is this
They
another?
do. This is a 14-inch, which is a big, it probably weighs 35 pounds empty. And that's one of the things, certainly, the women back then didn't need to go to the gym because they lifted cast iron every day
Right.
for the cooking. Yeah, and then this little pot over here actually is on a trivet. I'm cooking some apples in there, apples and cinnamon. And that is, this pot does not have legs on it, so you
Okay.
can the Dutch ovens you can suspend also, but I just put coals down and we have that cooking on top of a trivet there.
Okay. Under the table, is that
Yeah.
a toaster? Is that an early
Yes.
toaster?
That is an early toaster. You would sit that right in front of the fire and put your bread on it, and then just turn it around to toast the other side.
Interesting.
So I have here flour and cornmeal, baking soda, and just a 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, just so it's not too dry and tasteless. And the milk is actually the recipe called for buttermilk, which you can actually substitute milk with for every teaspoon of milk you add or for every cup of milk you add a teaspoon of vinegar. And I have 2 eggs beaten here, and I'm just going to mix this all together.
And so what are we making now?
We are making corn cakes.
Okay.
And it's like a little pancake. And this would have been, comes by many names. It can be called a Johnny cake, it can be called a hoe cake. And they actually think that the slaves in the South may have, when they were out in the field, built a fire and had their little stuff with them and made them on the back of a hoe. But there actually was an implement that was called a hoe pan. And they would mix it up and make it just like a little pancake. And then you just sort of flip them like a pancake. This is our
And it's in a
gingerbread
molded
cake.
tin.
It's in a molded tin. And we're going to let it cool for about 5 minutes, and then we'll turn it out onto a plate. And in the bottom of the Dutch oven, I've learned, you have to put either one of your S hooks, or some people use pebbles from the driveway, or a little trivet or something. You don't, just like you wouldn't put food on the bottom of your oven, you don't want to put things on the bottom of here because it will burn. I'm just going to let that burn out. Okay, come on, little pancakes. There we go. Okay, well, we could get just a little dunner than that. But this is the jar that we found when I was planting a rose bush in my front yard.
Oh, that's great.
This is where I nicked it with the shovel a little bit. And it was probably a ginger beer or
So this is from
cider.
the pottery that the Bizette family
We think it was
made.
probably from the pottery. Yeah, and it was right out in what is now our front yard, which would have been a side yard. This doorway here was actually the front door, because this one is the one that faces south. And their
Okay.
front door always faced south, so that it was warm in the winter. Another interesting thing that is a reproduction is this little box, which you don't see a lot. It's a reproduction of it's a candle box. And it would have hung on the wall, obviously not at the fireplace, to keep the candles from the mice getting into them. And to keep them cool and up so they didn't have a problem with them.
Well, this is
There's a couple pieces of pottery.
a phenomenal collection of material, and we thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you for visiting.
If possible, I'd like to
Oh, absolutely. Have to
try a little piece there.
Try a piece of gingerbread.
Oh, that's good. That's very good. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's show as we got the chance to explore some of these kitchen utensils and gadgets here at the East Brunswick Museum. And also with our visit to food historian Susen Luczy, and had the opportunity to see her cook on an 18th century open hearth fireplace. So thank you for watching, and come along again as we travel on the History Trail.